Hey guys, it's Chris, and it's finally here. House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 1. We can finally talk about it after 3 long years of the long night of waiting after the ending of Game of Thrones. We're finally back in Westeros. Have a lot of thoughts about the show. Overall, it's outstanding so far. I think it's going to hold its own against Game of Thrones for sure. Have a few minor critiques about, we'll talk about near the end of the video, but first, let's jump right in. This is what you're here for. Let's go through the entire episode and break it down. So first we have this cold open. We talked about this in a couple of videos. I thought this is what they would do. We had a cold open here of the Great Council of 101 AC. This was at Harrenhal. Obviously, we saw Harrenhal in Game of Thrones when Tywin Lannister was there along with Arya. But it is interesting how they did the cold open with the voiceover from Rhaenyra. That was older Rhaenyra speaking. But essentially, Rhaenyra gives the voiceover breaking down what had happened prior, where you had Rhaenys passed over for the Iron Throne before, where her father died, and both of Jaehaerys' elder sons died, so he was left with no heir. Then he called the council, and then it came down to Rhaenyra once again and Viserys, and the council overwhelmingly voted for Viserys, and then obviously he's chosen to be the next king and Prince of Dragonstone, so we kind of go over that. And then we jump to the text on the screen where it establishes it's the 9th year of King Viserys' reign, 172 years before the birth of Daenerys Targaryen, so they were very clear on that, where the text kind of hung around a little longer than the rest of it. 172 years before Dany was born, really connecting that to Game of Thrones. So anyway, we open with Rhaenyra and Syrax just flying around, flying to the dragon pit. Obviously, it's kind of establishing her character. This is so far a very character-based show, which is what makes shows really good. We're kind of diving into the characters, their personalities, their backstories. So we see Rhaenyra, she just loves flying. She's kind of a warrior princess, so to speak, very similar to Arya if you think about Game of Thrones. She's flying to the dragon pit and meets Allison, and we see Harold Westerling waiting there for her. Obviously, she is the princess, so she will have personal protection from the King's Guard at all times. But the little cool details they have in this show are really, really good. We see the Dragon Keepers, which are essentially a group of people who essentially kind of worship dragons and Targaryens, and they're all speaking high Valyrian. I thought that was really, really good. We get a sense of Syrax. This is kind of a younger Syrax, so we'll see Syrax grow, obviously, throughout the years, because this is about 15 years or so before the dance actually starts with the older Rhaenyra, which we'll see in probably, I'm guessing, around episode 6. I think we'll get the first half of the season, 5 episodes, with the younger characters, and then we'll jump ahead to the older versions of Rhaenyra and Allison and some others. So anyway, she flies through the Hill of Rhaenys. This is where the dragon pit is built. Now, of course, we will see that destroyed, as we saw in Game of Thrones. We'll see that near the end of the whole entire series. So her and Allison and Harold Westerling and her entourage go into the Red Keep, and the Red Keep looks a lot different. Now, first of all, it's interesting, the artwork on the walls is very Kama Sutra-like as far as some of the interesting artwork all over King's Landing and the Red Keep. I don't think King Jaehaerys would have had that stuff put up. Perhaps Viserys did later on when he became king. This is, after all, 9 years after the very beginning of the show. But we got to saw a lot more of the hallways and little areas, and it's very, very busy. It's bustling. This is the height of Targaryen power, where in Game of Thrones, you just had a handful of people in one room or whatever, and you never really saw other people just kind of walking around the Red Keep doing their daily routines or whatever it may be. So that was pretty good, just kind of seeing the Red Keep being more alive. And then we see Aemma Arryn. This is Rhaenyra's mother and the first wife to Viserys Targaryen. It was really cool to kind of put that in there and get them kind of establish their relationship. Obviously, she doesn't last the entire episode. We've kind of expected that once I saw her. But we get an idea of their relationship. You know, you kind of learn a little bit more about Rhaenyra, how she's more like a warrior princess. She'd rather charge in the battle as opposed to producing children. And her mother was like, that's how we serve the realm, as the birthing bed, all that kind of stuff. We got to produce heirs and all that kind of thing. So you kind of see the different personalities, but obviously they had a really close relationship. So really good, again, overall, at the very beginning, kind of to give us the first little taste of Westeros again during House of the Dragon. Very character-driven, and immediately got to see, obviously, Syrax, to see the dragons in such detail. Seeing some of the different dragons and their different personalities and how they bond with their riders is going to be really good and make for really good TV. Then we jump to our first small council meeting, and it's really interesting. We saw them use the little balls here. It looks like they kind of sit them down in this thing before they speak. It's almost like an accountability thing, kind of an attendance thing as opposed to a voting system. Maybe we'll see that again. Maybe when they actually vote on something, they'll take those balls and put them back in the center, but we saw them all grab the things and then sit them down before they spoke. We see Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, our first look at him, and he immediately brings up Kragas Drahar, the crab feeder. We talked about him in a previous video, and we'll definitely see more of him during the War for the Stepstones. But he immediately brings him up and the triarchy about the Stepstones, so they're kind of setting that up for later episodes. Probably episode 2 or 3, I would imagine we'll see the War for the Stepstones, because we do have, I believe, young Rhaenyra and maybe Rhaenys and probably Laenor Velaryon as well on Sea Smoke probably going to help in this war, as opposed to the books where it's only Daemon and Caraxes. So he's kind of setting that up. The other people we see there, obviously, are Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, along with King Viserys. Again, Corlys Velaryon is the master of ships at this time. We see Lyman Beesbury, who's the master of coin. He'll come into play a little later, too. I won't go into any spoilers there, but we'll see more of him. We see Lionel Strong, who is the Master of Laws. I didn't see Larys Strong here, the Master of War this time, but we also see Grand Maester Mellos at this time. There were a few Grand Maesters to come through during this time period, but Grand Maester Mellos will be the main guy for this series. I also want to say really quickly, I thought it was pretty cool, actually, to see the little nod where Rhaenyra's mother, Aemma, and her father, Viserys, both kind of smell her and say, "You stink of dragon, you know, go take a bath," or whatever. So those little details you don't really think about. So it's really interesting they threw that in there, and they had, you know, both of her parents basically knowing she had been out flying, and it really just establishes her character and personality. Again, she's a lot like Arya Stark. She'd rather be out flying around on a dragon as opposed to being in court and being a quote-unquote lady. So in the council, they do discuss the tournament coming up, which will be the celebration of the new heir, and Viserys thinks he's going to have a son. He really harps on that, and you can see it kind of gets under Rhaenyra's skin, so they're kind of establishing that as well. And again, they talk about the Chararchy and the War for the Stepstones, or what will be the War for the Stepstones, so they're kind of setting that up for a later time. And then we jump over to our first look at Daemon and Rhaenyra. He is in the throne room. He had kind of snuck in under his brother's nose, sitting on the Iron Throne, and she walks in with Harold Westerling, and they are speaking High Valyrian. I thought this is a really good touch to kind of, you know, stay in touch with their Targaryen roots, because they're obviously, this is the height of their power. They all learn this language. This is their kind of their first language, or their mother tongue, so to speak, as Dany said back in Game of Thrones. So really good touch there. And he gives her a Valyrian steel necklace. The first time we saw Valyrian steel jewelry of any kind in Game of Thrones in Westeros or whatever. And she does mention it's like Dark Sisters. So they're talking about their heritage. It's only been, you know, 100 years or so since Aegon has conquered the continent, but they're already talking about their Valyrian heritage. So I thought that was a really good touch. And at the very end, after he puts it on her, he does say beautiful. So there will be some kind of relationship there. Obviously, she likes her uncle, but obviously she also seems to like Sir Criston Cole, which we'll get into in a little bit, and we'll certainly see more of that develop in future episodes. The question is will Daemon somehow be involved on the side, as in the books it's told about Mushroom? Maybe he teaches her the art of love. And then we see Rhaenyra and Allison in the Godswood. This is a big change from the books as far as the main story as well, is because there is no weirwood tree in the Godswood at King's Landing, only a stump. The heart tree in King's Landing is actually an oak tree, but for the sake of this show, they put one back in the show, I guess, because there's going to be a magical element. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So they're really establishing their relationship. They mention Nymeria here, and this is a little nod to the up-and-coming potential show we may see on HBO, 10,000 Ships, which goes over Nymeria and the Queen of the Rhoynar and how she came over and conquered Dorne. So a little nod to other shows in production. And then we see a shot here of Viserys where he has a spot on his back, and I'm thinking this might be some kind of cancer. This is not a book thing to my knowledge. In the book, it's a different health condition that kind of, you know, brings him down in the end. I won't get into that for spoiler reasons for future episodes. But this may just be some kind of foreshadowing that, you know, that something's going wrong health-wise, so it doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's going to be. And of course, this whole time he's just kind of waiting on the birth of his son. He's sure it's going to be his son. You know, he wants an heir and all that good stuff. And he never really considers at this point Rhaenyra his heir, although she's been there the entire time. His firstborn child, his eldest child, all that good stuff. She meets all the criteria except she's a woman, which of course is the point of this whole damn show and the point of the whole war. But of course, this is where he also, you know, meets his wife, Aemma Arryn, while she's soaking in the bathtub, and they, you know, drop some names here, you know, kind of showing the detail of Ice and Fire from Ryan Condal, the writers. And he talks about this dream he had, so we're not 100% sure if it's prophetic, but he talks about, you know, he sets his son, who was born with a crown on the Iron Throne, and that might have been a little foreshadowing about, you know, the childbirth we saw later in the episode, where she actually says, yeah, you know, something to the effect of, yeah, born with a crown, labor is hard enough as it is, you know, actually talking about cutting her up, that type of thing, which kind of foreshadows what happens later in the episode. So really cool to kind of see their relationship, although she doesn't last long, obviously, for the entire show. She's already out of here in episode 1, but it's a very, very character-driven show, and I like these little touches they're putting in there. And one little criticism I would have, I'll mention a little bit later as well, is, you know, they felt like a little bit too much info dumping in some places, but not a big deal. Just felt like, you know, some of the lines were a little bit just to show you that we know what we're talking about, we know our book knowledge type of thing. So, but overall, no real complaints, just a little minor nitpick. And then we move over to see Daemon and the City Watch, and I liked Daemon immediately, by the way. I mean, this is really, you know, Matt Smith has grown on me since we saw all the trailers and teasers and more episodes and stuff like that. and I think he really fits Daemon. A couple little things bother me still, but overall I think he really fits Daemon well, so I did like him immediately in the character. He gives the pep talk to the City Watch. Apparently they just formed the City Watch not too long ago, and of course this is where they get the name the Gold Cloaks, which you saw in Game of Thrones. This is where he has them armored better, he gives them better weapons, and the actual golden cloaks, and he says basically they're going to learn to fear the color gold. And he makes a big show of these public punishments for all these criminals. So if you steal something, you're a thief, he removes your fucking hand. If you sexually assault somebody, he castrates you on the spot, and if you murder somebody or whatever, he takes off your fucking head. And of course this kind of sets up the next scene at the small council where Otto Hightower is talking shit about Daemon. And this is going to be a major little rift in the family here, which causes a lot of this stuff in the first place. We go back to the small council. He's talking about how Daemon made the spectacle of things last night and scared the hell out of the whole city, which was Daemon's entire point anyway, that they need to be feared. And I really like the little relationship between him and Corlys Velaryon as well, because he actually backs him up on the small council, saying we did establish the Gold Cloaks to bring back law and order, and they should be feared. But this was a great scene where Daemon's actually in there, giving some dialogue during the council meeting or whatever. Then we jump over to Daemon's other half, where he is the prince of the city, or as they also call him, Lord Fleabottom. He is in the brothel, and we first see Mysaria. This is the Mysaria, the White Worm. She'll have a bigger role to play later on as well, but she is his lover. And what I liked about this, besides seeing Mysaria walk over to him at the window scene, obviously, is that it shows his vulnerable side. So Daemon is a wild card. He is crazy in some aspects, but he also shows his vulnerable side. Obviously, he was having an issue there, whatever it may be, and she walks over to comfort him, and she realizes something's going on, and he's being overshadowed by, Rhaenyra, and he's, he does love his brother, but he also wants to be recognized, and we see that later on in their conversation in the throne room as well. And then we jump over to the tournament, and this tournament was outstanding compared to anything we saw in Game of Thrones. It was just a very quick couple of scenes we saw in Game of Thrones, not many people there. This was a big, lavish event, lots of colors, everybody's wearing their own heraldry as opposed to wearing their overlords. Main thing here was to introduce us to Sir Criston Cole. We also see a little nod where Rhaenyra says, "Who is this, a mystery knight?" And that is kind of a nod to actually Lyanna Stark, who is the Mystery Knight, the Knight of the Laughing Tree, which is a whole different story during the Game of Thrones era. But you can see little Easter eggs and nods throughout this, what I thought was really good. We also get introduced to Rhaenys here because a Baratheon comes up, either Boros Baratheon or possibly Royce Baratheon, his son, and asks for Rhaenys' favor, and she says, "Good luck, cousin." Her mother was a Baratheon. In the book, she actually has black hair, and as she gets older, she has silver streaks. So they did change that for the show to make her look more Targaryen-like. But Rhaenys is going to come into play as well, and she's a badass in her own right, and a dragon rider, of course, who rides the dragon melees. We see Daemon come out in the joust, and he chooses Otto Hightower's son, Gawain Hightower, because obviously he can't stand Otto Hightower. And of course, Otto Hightower, as you saw throughout the episode, can't stand Daemon. He thinks he's a horrible person. He thinks he's going to be the next Maegor the Cruel. But really, Otto Hightower's there to serve his own purposes. But there's going to be a parallel here between the relationships between Daemon and Otto, and kind of Rhaenyra and Allison as well. So we're kind of seeing that rift already start. So then we start getting the word that Aemma is going into childbirth. So Viserys gets the word something's going wrong. He goes back in there. I like how they did this between the tournament of the kind of the violence that took place in the tournament and kind of the violence, so to speak, in the birthing bed with Aemma Arryn. So essentially it comes down to this horrible decision where you have to choose between your wife and your unborn child. I think Paddy Considine does a great job with Viserys. This is something that's not really in the books. You don't really get a lot about his personality, and I think this is what George R. R. Martin liked as well, as they kind of did Viserys different, and also with the possibility of kind of magical dreams. This is a very interesting Viserys take on House of the Dragon. So we got this kind of intercut back and forth between the tournament where Daemon is, fighting Sir Criston Cole in the joust and in the melee as well, while she's trying to give birth. And of course, Daemon and Aemma both end up losing. The son was born. His name was Balon. He was a boy. He kind of got his wish, but he only lasted for a few minutes, at least in the show. So we do have a funeral for Aemma and Balon, and that's when we see Rhaenyra light the funeral pyre with Syrax as well. But then we cut back to the small council, and immediately Otto Hightower, just like in the books, brings up the succession. Now there's no clear successor. You don't have a son. All this kind of stuff, and it drives Viserys crazy, and at one point he actually sends him back to Old Town. We'll see if that happens in the show or not. But we see Corlys Velaryon actually supporting Daemon, where he says he has an heir. His name is Daemon Targaryen. But Viserys actually kind of blows a fuse for a minute and actually starts supporting his brother against Otto Hightower. These people think that Daemon's just going to come in and murder him in his sleep for the throne, and while he does want power, he would never actually harm his brother. And this is what I liked, where Viserys kind of stepped up and stood up for Daemon while he was listening in the background. And we also learn a little bit more about Corlys Velaryon here. He's still a little bit bitter about Rhaenys and his son Laenor being passed over for the Iron Throne previously, because he does come up and say there are other options here if you don't want to go with Rhaenyra Targaryen. And then immediately after this, Otto Hightower starts working on Allison. And you can see why I say he's a bastard, and I'm Team Black all the way, because this is going to be Team Green. He immediately sends Allison to go see the king. Viserys is going, obviously mourning his wife and child, and he even tells her, wear one of your mother's dresses. So you can kind of see what he's doing here. He wants to start planting the seeds so Allison can become the new queen. And then we do jump right over to that scene where Viserys is in his PJs, and apparently he carves sculptures. I thought that was pretty cool, because you wonder what they do in their spare time. You got to have a hobby, right? He's carving a castle here out of stone or whatever. Allison comes in and has a good conversation with Viserys, and that kind of starts their relationship. And then we jump over to Daemon, or Lord Fleabottom, back at the brothel, and there's an orgy going on. And of course, this is when Daemon kind of gets drunk and toasts the heir for a day. And this was kind of meant to show Daemon's character. While he didn't want his son to actually die, he is kind of relieved that he's also still the heir to the Iron Throne. So it kind of shows Daemon's dark side a little bit. They always say, as far as Daemon Targaryen, that he's both good and bad, dark and light. So it really shows the grayness of his character, which of course is what makes really good characters. But of course, Otto Hightower in the next scene gets word of this and reports to Viserys that Daemon's basically making fun of him, making fun of his dead child. And that's when Viserys summons Daemon to the throne room. And this is, of course, where we see the first issues in their relationship, where Viserys is basically saying, I've always defended you while everyone else seems to hate you. And Daemon kind of jumps in like, no, you've always just tried to send me away, whether to the Vale or to the City Watch. You've never asked me to be your hand after 10 years of being king. And he said, why would I do that? He said, because you're my brother. And then we get to the interesting scene where Viserys has now decided to name Rhaenyra heir to the Iron Throne. So they go down to Valyrian the Black Dread. His skull is sitting there, and this is the last dragon that Viserys rode, by the way. He rode him once before he died, and he never claimed another dragon. He has a little speech about dragons, all that good stuff, but also reveals a major theory that has been going around for years and years now. I did a video on this about 3 years ago, and I re-released a re-edited version of that a couple weeks ago, where this major theory is now confirmed, and George R. Martin apparently approved this. So Aegon the Conqueror didn't just take over the Seven Kingdoms just for power in and of itself. He did it because he had a dream. So he has had a prophetic dream, and he actually mentions Daenerys the Dreamer. Now, Daenerys the Dreamer is the girl in Old Valyria who had a dream of the doom of Valyria and told her father Aenys, and he believed her. So the Targaryens took 5 dragons and their whole family and moved to Dragonstone, and 12 years later the doom actually happened. So apparently Aegon the Conqueror also had prophetic dreams about the White Walkers. Now, of course, he didn't know exactly what it was. He didn't say White Walker, but essentially he knew that it was going to be the end of mankind, death versus life type of thing. And Viserys mentions that it would start with a cold winter coming out of the north. And when he says this, he kind of looks down at the dagger, which of course is the dagger that will end up killing the Night King in the future, although it won't be Arya in the books, I don't think. But as we saw in the show, this is the Valyrian steel dagger that was Tyrion's, then Littlefinger's, and then ended up in Arya's hands after Bran gave it to her to actually kill the Night King. So good little nod there. Although, again, a lot of us don't like how it happened in Game of Thrones Season 8. That is pretty cool to kind of connect that there and to finally know for sure that Aegon Targaryen and Aegon the Conqueror had prophetic dreams. So during this time of this conversation, all the lords are now coming in swearing fealty to her as he actually officially names her heir to the Iron Throne. You see Hobart Hightower, you see Ormond Baratheon, you see Rickon Stark. Now later on, at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, his son Cregan Stark will be Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, but of course that hasn't happened yet. And of course, as this is happening, we do see Daemon is notably absent. He's with Caraxes. We get our first shot of Caraxes, and Mysaria comes with him. And apparently they're about to take off to Essos, more than likely, because I don't think he's going back to Runestone with this quote-unquote bronze bitch. Now, what's really interesting is they called this theory the Song of Ice and Fire. I don't know if I agree with that, although essentially that's what it is, because it ends up being about Jon Snow in the future, of course. Of course, they don't know all this, but I don't know if he actually knows what that means in detail. But apparently this secret is passed down from Targaryen king to Targaryen king, which may help to explain Aerys II, Dany's father, saying burn them all, like we talked about during Game of Thrones. That was a prevalent theory, although it was never confirmed or denied. And we close out with a close-up shot of young Rhaenyra being named heir to the Iron Throne, and this whole episode was outstanding from top to bottom for the most part. A few minor little things that bugged me, like I said, mostly just some of the dialogue where it felt like a little bit of an info dump, but it's really there to kind of introduce you to the world and the characters, timeline, all that good stuff as well. Have plenty more videos on that, by the way, as far as the timeline, if you're still confused about things, about the time this happens. about the setting, all that good stuff, and all the characters in more detail about the characters. But overall, this was outstanding. Really, really good to be back in Westeros again. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Did you love this? Did you like it? Was it okay? Did you have problems with it? I'd always questioned since this came out some of the casting decisions, but Daemon grew on me really quick the more I saw him in the teasers and trailers as Daemon as far as Matt Smith goes. To me, he seems very much like Daemon. I think it's really interesting to turn this into a story about these two young girls who are really best friends, but not so much in the book. So that's a little bit of a change as well, but I think it's really good. It's going to really make it more of a tragic story as far as their relationship and how it starts off so good. It ends up so different. I don't know yet if it will overshadow Game of Thrones itself. Obviously, with the ending of Game of Thrones, most people did not like that, so that's certainly going to help. But this is right there with it. It looks good. It feels like Westeros. We're going to see all the different dragons and their personalities, and the characters are really good. It's going to be a really good character-driven show. So I'm really, really excited about the rest of this season. 9 more episodes to go. So again, let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the continued support, especially you guys on Patreon. And a huge shout out to my executive Patreon SmokeScreen producers. And of course, if you dig what I do here, please give these videos a like, comment, and a share. And do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button and let YouTube know we're still here as we try to reach 100,000 subscribers. So thanks again. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.